Commissioner Ben-Veniste.
Good morning, gentlemen. First, I would like to personally commend each of you and the dedicated men and women who serve our nation through NORAD. I'd like to explain to you what you probably know already, and that is that our mandate as a commission is to provide the most detailed and accurate exposition in our final report of what occurred leading up to the 9/11 tragedy and the events subsequent thereto. And so please understand that our questions may be very pointed. We mean no disrespect, but we have our mission as well. Now, General McKinley, is it fair to say that the mission and the primary responsibility of NORAD is to defend our homeland and our citizens against air attack?
On the day of September 11, 2001, our mission was to defend North America, to surveil, to intercept, to identify, and if necessary, to destroy those targets which we were posturing were going to come from outside our country. In fact, that tracks originating over the landmass of the United States were identified friendly by origin. Therefore, those alert sites that were positioned on the morning of September 11th were looking out primarily on our coasts at the Air Defense Identification Zone, which extends outwards of 100 to 200 miles off our shore. So that was the main focus of NORAD at the time.
I asked you about your responsibility, sir, and I ask you again whether it was not your responsibility as NORAD to protect the United States and its citizens against air attack.
It is, and it was, and I would just caveat your comment by saying that our mission was, at that time, not designed to take internal FAA radar data to track or to identify tracks originating within our borders. It was to look outward as a Cold War vestige, primarily developed during the Cold War to protect against Soviet long-range bomber penetration of our intercept zone.
Well, I think, sir, you have used a good term, not good for the United States, but accurate in terms of the vestigial mandate operationally to look outward toward the borders rather than inward. And by vestigial, you mean, I'm sure, as a result of our decades of confrontation with the former Soviet Union.
Correct, sir.
And so on the day of September 11th, if you can see these dots, I know it may be difficult to see, NORAD was positioned in a perimeter around the United States, but nothing in the central region, nothing on the border with Canada.
That's correct, sir.
Now, let me ask you, sir, whether the concept of terrorists using an airplane as a weapon was something unknown to the intelligence community on September 10th, 2001.
Very good question, and I asked.
Thank you.
I asked our staff to provide me some data on what they had that morning. As I said, General Arnold was at the helm that morning. But basically, the comments I received from my staff was that there was no intelligence indication at any level within NORAD or DOD of a terrorist threat to commercial aviation prior to the attacks. And information from the daily Joint Chiefs Intelligence Report on the morning of September 11th indicated no specific dangers or threats within the country.
My question, sir, and I mean no disrespect, but we'll save time if you listen to what I ask you. My question is, the concept of terrorists using airplanes as weapons was not something which was unknown to the U.S. intelligence community on September 10th, 2001. Isn't that fair to say?
I'd like the intelligence community to address that. I would find it hard to believe that they hadn't speculated against that, but it was unavailable to us at the time.
Well, let's start, for example, with September 12, 1994. A Cessna 150L crashed into the south lawn of the White House, barely missing the building and killing the pilot. Similarly, in December of 1994, an Algerian armed Islamic group of terrorists hijacked an Air France flight in Algiers and threatened to crash it into the Eiffel Tower. In October of 1996, the intelligence community obtained information regarding an Iranian plot to hijack a Japanese plane over Israel and crash it into Tel Aviv. In August of 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that a group of unidentified Arabs planned to fly an explosive-laden plane from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. The information was passed on to the FBI and the FAA. In September of 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that Osama bin Laden's next operation could possibly involve flying an aircraft loaded with explosives into a U.S. airport and detonating it. In August 2001, the intelligence community obtained information regarding a plot to either bomb the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi from an airplane or crash an airplane into it. In addition, in the Atlanta Olympics, the United States government and the Department of Justice and my colleague, Jamie Gorelick, were involved in planning against possible terrorist attacks at the Olympics, which included the potential of an aircraft flying into the stadium. In July 2001, the G8 summit in Genoa, attended by our president. Among the measures that were taken were positioning surface-to-air missiles, ringing Genoa, closing the Genoa airport, and restricting all airspace over Genoa. Was not this information, sir, available to NORAD as of September 11th, 2001?
It's obvious by your categorization that those events all took place and that NORAD had that information. I would only add, sir, that the intelligence data that we postured our forces for and the training and the tactics and the procedures that we used to prepare our missions for support of the combatant commander of NORAD had hijacking as a primary intercept tactic. And we have some of the finest fighter pilots, as you know, in the world, who are some of the best people in the world, who can do their mission extremely well. But we had not postured prior to September 11, 2001 for the scenario that took place that day.
Well, obviously, it would be hard to imagine posturing for the exact scenario, but isn't it a fact, sir, that prior to September 11, 2001, NORAD had already in the works plans to simulate in an exercise a simultaneous hijacking of two planes in the United States?
Colonel Scott, do you have any data on that? I'm not aware of that, sir. I was not present at the time.
That was Operation Amalgam Virgo.
Yes, sir. Specifically, Operation Amalgam Virgo, which I was involved in before I retired, was a scenario using a third world uninhabited aerial vehicle launched off a rogue freighter in the Gulf of Mexico. General Arnold can back me up. At the time, one of our greatest concerns was the proliferation of cruise missile technology and the ability for terrorist groups to get that technology, get it close enough to our shores to launch it. In fact, this exercise, we used actual drone, MQM-107 drones, which are about the size of a cruise missile, to exercise our fighters and our radars in a Gulf of Mexico scenario.
You're referring to Amalgam 01, are you not?
Yes, sir. Amalgam.
I'm referring to Amalgam 02, which was in the planning stages prior to September 11th, 2001, sir. Is that correct?
That was after I retired, and I was not involved in '02.
And will you accept that the exercise involved a simultaneous hijacking scenario?
I was not involved in '02.
Sir, I do have some information on '02, if you'd allow me to read it for the record.
Please.
Amalgam Virgo in general, '02, was an exercise created to focus on peacetime and contingency NORAD missions. One of the peacetime scenarios that is and has been a NORAD mission for years is support to other government departments. Within this mission falls hijackings. Creativity of the designer aside, prior to 9/11, hijack motivations were based on political objectives, i.e. asylum or release of captured prisoners or political figures. Threats of killing hostages or crashing were left to the scriptwriters to invoke creativity and broaden the required response for players.
Well, isn't that a bit fatuous given the specific information that I've given you? It wasn't in the minds of scriptwriters when the Algerians had actually hijacked the plane which they were attempting to fly into the Eiffel Tower, and all of the other scenarios which I've mentioned to you. I don't mean to argue with you, but my question is, sir, given the awareness of the terrorist use of planes as weapons, how was it that NORAD was still focusing outward, protecting the United States against attacks from the Soviet Union or elsewhere, and was not better prepared to defend against the hijacking scenarios of a commercial jet laden with fuel used as a weapon to target citizens of the United States? When you say our training, our mission was vestigial, I think you said it in an encapsulated form, but would you agree that on the basis of the information available that there could have been better preparedness by NORAD to meet this threat?
In retrospect, sir, I think I would agree with your comment.
With respect to the bases that were available for protecting the East Coast, and Colonel Scott has gone through the scrambling of aircraft. I wanted to focus just on one flight, Flight 77, and then Secretary Lehman will ask you some more specific questions. With respect to Flight 77, sir, you testified previously before the House Armed Services Committee, and General Eberhardt was questioned. You're familiar with his testimony, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He was questioned about Flight 77, and because of the use of Langley Air Base, which is 105 miles from our capital, as opposed to, say, Andrews Air Force Base, which is in the neighborhood. The question arises, again, about the positioning and the thought behind the positioning of fighter planes to protect our capital in an enhanced terrorist threat situation such as existed on September 10th, 2002. Let me ask you about Flight 77 again. The question was, the timeline that we've been given is that at 8:55 on September 11, American Airlines Flight 77 began turning east, away from its intended course, and at 9:10, Flight 77 was detected by the FAA radar over West Virginia, heading east. That was after the two planes had already struck the Trade Center tower. Is that correct, Colonel Scott?
Yes, sir.
Now, 15 minutes later, at 9:25, the FAA notified NORAD, according to this statement, that Flight 77 was headed toward Washington. Was that the first notification? 9:25 that NORAD or DOD had that Flight 77 was probably hijacked? And if it was, do you know why it took 15 minutes for the FAA to notify NORAD? General Eberhard said, "Sir, there's one minor difference. I saw it as 9:24, which you do as well, that we were notified, and that's the first notification that we received." Do you know if that was the first notification to DOD? Yes, sir, that's the first documented notification that we received. And I want to focus on the word documented because it's very important for us to know when NORAD actually received notification, given the fact that planes had already crashed into the World Trade Center, and given, I'm sure, the assumption that these were terrorist acts and there could be more coming, more planes coming. Is it in fact correct, sir, that the first notification of any type that NORAD received was not until 9:24 with respect to Flight 77?
With your concurrence, sir, I'd like to ask General Arnold to address that. He was on the floor that morning.
Thank you.
Simple answer to your question is I believe that to be a fact. The 9:24 is the first time that we had been advised of American 77 as a possible hijacked airplane. Our focus, you got to remember that there's a lot of other things going on simultaneous here, was on United 93, which was being pointed out to us very aggressively, I might say, by the FAA. Because of our radars looking outward and not inward, the only way for us to know where anything was for the FAA to pass along that information to us.
Well, is it not the case, General Arnold, that there was an open line established between FAA, NORAD, and other agencies, including CIA and FBI, that morning?
Well, I wasn't on that line at that particular time if that were the case. In fact, there's an open line established between our sectors at really the tactical level where they're controlling the aircraft, talking to the FAA controllers from time to time. We did not have an open line at that time with the FAA. That is not accurate.
You did not. You were not. NORAD was not in contact by...
The Continental United States NORAD region, my headquarters, were responsible for the Continental United States Air Defense, did not have an open line with the FAA at that time.
Was there some NORAD office that had an open line with the FAA? Excuse me, let me finish my question, please. Was there some NORAD office, and you'll forgive us because we had asked for this information prior to the hearing from FAA and did not receive it. But we are advised that there was indeed an open line between either the net or some other name given to essentially an ongoing conference whereunder, in real time, FAA was providing information as it received it. Immediately after the first crash into the towers, we're told, with respect to each of the events that were ongoing of any remarkable nature. I see General McKinley is nodding.
I'd like to, if I may, address this based on my research and review for this commission. It's my understanding that the FAA was in contact with our Northeast Air Defense Sector at Rome, New York, understanding the relationship of how we defend North America from threats. NORAD located in Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado Springs. Our Continental NORAD region, our Air Operations Center located at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. That's where the Joint Force Air Component Commander resides. And then we have 3 sectors based on the size and volume of our country that handle that. It is my understanding from talking with both FAA and our supervisors at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in Rome that those lines were open and that they were discussing these issues.
So is it fair to say that at least the NORAD personnel in Rome, New York, had information available to it in real time once it saw, when we were advised that this occurred at approximately 9:02, which would have been 22 minutes earlier, that Flight 77 first was observed deviating from its course, something in which, in the context of what was going on that day, would be quite interesting, if not remarkable.
Got any comments?
Sir, I think it's also important to understand that like the CONUS region, the FAA is also broken down into subordinate command and control centers as well. I know that the Boston Center was talking directly to the Northeast sector. I don't believe Flight 77 was in Boston Center's airspace. They were in Cleveland.
I think the FAA can report accurately on this, but I believe 77 was in Cleveland Center airspace when it developed the problem where they lost its radar image. And I believe, and the FAA again can testify better to this, they would take action based on losing that identification in Cleveland.
Well, actually, I think, according to the information that we have, the first indication was not a loss of radar contact, but rather a course deviation with respect to Flight 77. Now, I don't mean to take up any more time in this because we're going to want to follow up on all of this information in great detail, but let me ask whether there is regularly made a tape recording of these open line communications.
Not to my knowledge.
Not to my knowledge.
That does FAA, to your knowledge, keep a recording of these crisis situations?
I am unaware, but I would certainly direct that to them, please.
So to the best of your knowledge, you don't have anything further to shed light on when you first learned, NORAD, first learned of Flight 77's probable hijack status prior to 9:24 a.m.
I can provide that for the record. I do not have any further knowledge at this time.
We would ask that you do so.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.